Hello everyone, welcome back to the Trumpet Daily. Let's start off today by just taking a quick look back over the past few years. 6 years ago, the United States had large armies in Iraq and Afghanistan. Its national debt was $9.5 trillion. 4 or 5 years ago, Egypt, Libya, and Syria were comparatively stable. America's traditional allies in Europe, Asia, and even the Middle East still look to the United States to provide some kind of leadership. Of course, at the time, we were telling you the United States was still in bad shape, but you could say it was hanging on by a thread. Now look at where we are today. Since 2008, we've seen a new administration brush off its traditional allies, embark on an apology tour, draw down its forces, and encourage its most dangerous enemies to rise in power. We've seen its Arab outreach fall flat. We've seen its pivot to Asia never materialize. We've seen an ambassador murdered in Benghazi. We've seen this administration allow Russia to take over handling the civil war in Syria, not to mention Russia literally taking over Crimea and destabilizing Ukraine. We've seen this administration soften its sanctions against Iran. And right now we're seeing thousands of illegal immigrants pour across the southern border. And we've seen our national debt accelerate past $17.6 trillion. But how does the Obama administration evaluate its foreign policy record? Hanging by a thread? In a free fall? Well, here's how the president's new spokesman, Josh Earnest, describes it.
I think that there have been a number of situations in which you've seen this administration intervene in a meaningful way that has substantially furthered American interests and substantially improved the tranquility of the global community.
It's hard to believe the president's press secretary would use the word tranquility to describe the pile of international crises we call the global community. Today, let's take a reality check and survey just what is actually happening in the global community, and let's find out where it's leading.
This gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world.
And he said unto me, you must prophesy again.
When responding to that question during the White House press briefing on Monday, Mr. Earnest offered three what he called foreign policy achievements, I guess you could say, as proof of how the United States has substantially improved the tranquility of the global community. He said, firstly, working with the international community to get rid of Syria's chemical weapons stockpile. The administration sees that as a victory. And then he pointed to last weekend's agreement between Afghanistan's two presidential candidates, an agreement that was brokered by the United States. And then there were the negotiations also last week between America and China that are supposed to advance American interests in the Asia-Pacific. So as proof of the substantial growth of global tranquility, the White House press secretary pointed to Syria, Afghanistan, and China. Now look at what's actually happening on the ground in those nations. Right now, Syria is embroiled in one of the most brutal civil wars of our modern times. More than 200,000 people have been slaughtered. Just last year, after the United States was humiliated by Bashar al-Assad, the U.S. turned to Russia, of all places, just to save face. Just today, it was reported that Assad was sworn in for a new term as Syria's president. And as he was sworn in, or on the same day, he vowed to crush the rebellion. Now, this is the same Syrian dictator that President Obama insisted just a few years ago that he must go. For the sake of the Syrian people, the time has come for President Assad to step aside. That's what President Obama said back in 2011. Now, what about Afghanistan? Look at what's happened over there just in the past month. This country's fragile government has been rocked by an electoral crisis where there's been widespread voter fraud. And all this comes at a time when America is completing its plans for a total withdrawal. It comes at a time when ethnic strife and violence is on the increase. Just yesterday, a suicide bomber killed 89 people at a busy market in eastern Afghanistan. It was one of the deadliest attacks in years. Last week, the United Nations issued a report saying the number of civilian casualties in Afghanistan had increased by 24% during the first half of this year, reaching levels not seen since 2009, 5 years ago. And then, of course, to take that third example that Mr. Earnest referred to, there's China and its territorial grab there in the South China Sea. An act of belligerence which really is frightening American allies all across the region, because it comes at a time, here again, when American power and influence is on the wane, and dramatically so. Let me take you to a Wall Street Journal article from just a few days ago. The president contends with arc of instability unseen since the 1970s. It says the breadth of global instability now unfolding hasn't been seen since the late 1970s. That wasn't a particularly good era for the United States. It says in the past month alone, the U.S. has faced twin civil wars in Iraq and Syria, renewed fighting between Israel and the Palestinians, an electoral crisis in Afghanistan, and ethnic strife on the edge of Russia in Ukraine. Off center stage, but high on the minds of U.S. officials, are growing fears that negotiations with Iran over its nuclear program could collapse this month, and that China is intensifying its territorial claims in East Asia. Now, that's the world today. And this article goes on to contrast the foreign policies of the last two administrations in Washington. It continues, Mr. Obama campaigned for the presidency in 2008 as the alternative to George W. Bush, as a leader who would wind down the U.S.'s Mideast wars and reach out diplomatically to historic adversaries such as Iran, Syria, and Russia. He promised to de-emphasize the role of U.S. military force and intensify the country's diplomatic and moral persuasion. It says Mr. Obama's supporters and opponents alike say he has largely followed through on those promises. I think everyone can pretty much agree on that. He has followed through on these foreign policy aims. That's true. But it's just hard to believe that 6 years into this, that anyone taking an objective look at the world today could conclude that it's substantially more tranquil than it was a few years ago. That's hard to believe. I mean, it's one thing for defenders of the administration to say that it's not the president's fault. You would expect that. But to say that we're actually making progress, that we're actually making gains, that we're better off, that the world is safer, that the world's more peaceful, that is pretty much blindness through and through, turning a blind eye to what is really happening in this world. Let me just take you to a little bit more of this press briefing from Monday. I showed you a clip at the top, and as the briefing continued on, they came back to this point about tranquility.
Do you really believe that this president's foreign policy has contributed to what you call the tranquility of the global community? Do you really think at this point in time you can talk about the tranquility of the global community?
Well, I think that there are certain places where the United States, based on those three examples that I cited before, where we can certainly cite tangible progress that's been made in pursuit of American interests. Ridding Syria of chemical weapons and ensuring that they no longer are a proliferation risk is certainly clearly within the interest of the United States of America. I would acknowledge readily that there is a lot of conflict and instability and hotspots all over the globe, but it has not eliminated the United States' ability or the President's ability to look out for and even advance American interests in a variety of regions across the globe.
So, I mean, to give him the benefit of the doubt, at least he does acknowledge unstable hotspots. But as fast as this world is breaking down right before our eyes, you have to wonder how much longer it's going to be before even the staunchest defenders of this administration will begin to wonder about what is happening right in front of us, right before us, and why are these things happening? Why does it seem like so many curses are setting in? There's more and more commentators that are talking about it, and of course those, again, that just want to defend this pie-in-the-sky utopian idealism. They're saying they're into apocalyptic-type prophecies or whatever it is. But when we come back from the break, we're going to look at what some of the prophecies of the Bible actually say. And when you think about what's happening in the world today, I mean, God was right on target when he was speaking through his prophets of old and through his apostles in the New Testament in telling us in advance by thousands of years what our society, what the global community would be like right here in the last days. We'll be right back.
A turning point in recent history has gone almost entirely overlooked. Since that time, an unseen cause has brought about national and world troubles in unprecedented fashion. Crises are intensifying as never before. In our generation, we are seeing radical changes to culture, family, education, religion, science, finance, politics, international relations. Everything has been affected. You cannot understand events without recognizing this unseen cause. The United States has been shaken in astonishing fashion. Have you wondered why the world's #1 superpower is declining so rapidly? Are you concerned about where the current administration is leading this country? The Bible provides penetrating insight into the invisible cause of society's decline. America is prophesied to fall before it rises again. The Bible also gives extraordinary insight into how that fall will come about. This insight puts the seriousness and urgency of current events in their true perspective. Understand what's in store for America and why. Visit thetrumpet.com and click on the Literature tab to request this free, enlightening booklet, America Under Attack.
Before the break, we looked at the growing instability in the global community. And if we were to shift our attention to what's happening here in the United States on the domestic front, it's the same story, isn't it? We see this growing instability. Everywhere that you look, we've talked a lot about that just recently, particularly with the immigration crisis down at the southern border. I want to take you to a few clips from a hearing that was held just today in the House of Representatives about the case that's being filed against the President's administration over some of the lawless acts that has the Republicans up in arms. This is from a House hearing today, a hearing on the GOP lawsuit against President Obama.
Our system is changing, and this body is the one branch that must act if we are to reverse those changes. We're seeing the emergence of a different model of government, a model long ago rejected by the framers, a dominant presidency has occurred with very little congressional opposition. Indeed, when President Obama pledged to circumvent Congress, he received rapturous applause from the very body that he was proposing to make practically irrelevant. Now, many members are contesting the right of this institution to even be heard in federal court. This body is moving from self-loathing to self-destruction in a system that is in crisis. The president's pledge to effectively govern alone is alarming, and what is most alarming is his ability to fulfill that pledge. When a president can govern alone, he can become a government unto himself, which is precisely the danger the framers sought to avoid. What we're witnessing today is one of the greatest crises that I expect the members of this committee and this body will face. It has a patina of politics that is hard to penetrate. It did not start with President Obama. I was critical of his predecessor, and certainly this goes back long before George Bush, but it has reached a tipping point. I've long advocated action by this body to aggressively seek to regain the ground that it has lost over decades.
So he's talking about, well, it's a pretty sobering opening statement that he gave there before this committee. And as I think is important to point out, he's a fairly liberal-minded thinker, very supportive of a lot of the president's policies, supportive of the Affordable Care Act, and yet nevertheless a scholar, a constitutional scholar who understands that what's happening is dangerous and that we're now reaching, as he said there, a tipping point with a dominant presidency, a crisis, as he called it, a system in crisis. And he says it's alarming. But how many people today in our society, in America, are even worried about it or that even know it's going on? A couple of more shorter clips here.
What is important to remember is that people misconstrue the separation of powers regularly. It is not there to protect the institutional rights of the branches. It is there to protect individual liberty. It was created by the framers to prevent any branch from aggregating enough power to be a danger to liberty. It is not about you. It is about the people that you represent.
A danger to liberty, freedoms that America is known for being taken away because of the same kinds of power grabs that we see going on all over the world. It's the spirit of this age, as we've noted before: lawlessness, division, and strife. And we see it right here in the United States. One final clip.
The president suggested he can go it alone, but there's no license in the Madisonian system to go it alone. He has said that he's going to resolve the deadlock in Congress, the division with Congress, by ordering changes on his own terms, as a majority of one. That's what makes it dangerous.
Dangerous. This from a man who voted for President Obama back in 2008. This from a man, as I say, who's very supportive of the policies, but alarmed by how these are being forced upon the American people, alarmed at how many liberties are being taken away. We've reached, as he said, a tipping point. He was quoted in the Washington Times, who had this report this morning, anticipating his testimony. It quotes Mr. Turley as saying, "It's tempting to embrace rule by a single person who offers to govern alone, to get things done. However, this is the very siren's call that our founders warned us to resist." It says, "We remain a nation of laws, and we have a court system designed to resolve such controversies." It's tempting, he says, to get on board with someone that comes along and says, "I'm going to get things done. If Congress doesn't act, I will." Sounds good, particularly to those who support those policies of that one individual, but it's dangerous, he says. He sees this, Mr. Turley, as a great crisis, perhaps the greatest that America's governing body will face. Pat Buchanan wrote a column recently as well, America no longer one nation, one people, it says. This was headlined at the Drudge Report earlier today and last night, I believe. Buchanan warns America could break up. Is that serious? Is that something that's alarming? Or do most just brush it aside as apocalyptic or far-fetched or, the musings of an alarmist? You go through some of the points he brings out in his article, his column, and it's alarming. He says that you look at what's happening on the southern border and really we need to step back and understand the larger context here of what's happening with all these illegal immigrants. This is what he says in his piece. The real issue, will America remain one nation, or are we on the road to balkanization and the breakup of America into ethnic enclaves? It says, for as Ronald Reagan said, a nation that cannot control its borders isn't really a nation anymore. We talked about this just yesterday on the program, The Assault on America's Southern Border. Is it really a nation when there are no borders, when there's no border security, when everything's wide open? He's quoting from John Jay, who wrote in the Federalist #2. He said, Providence has been pleased to give this one connected country to one united people, a people descended from the same ancestors, speaking the same language, professing the same religion, attached to the same principles of government, very similar in their manners and customs. I mean, as John Jay was saying there in the Federalist Papers, and as Pat Buchanan pointed out in his column, this is what the founders celebrated. This is what they went on and on about. Not our many differences, not all the diversity, but they really stressed the similarities. What bound us together? What kept us unified? The fact that there was one sameness of ancestry, the fact that there was a similar culture and faith and religion, those kinds of things. What today you hear commentators and politicians alike celebrating the balkanization of the United States, separating into all of these enclaves, as he says in his column. What a different United States we see today than the ones the framers set up. Very different. And it should be alarming if you have any sense of America's historical roots and values. It should be alarming. Back to what Mr. Buchanan said, we're no longer one unique people descended from the same ancestors, speaking the same language, professing the same religion. He says we're from every continent and country. Nearly 4 in 10 Americans trace their ancestry to Asia, Africa, and Latin America. We are a multiracial, multilingual, multicultural society in a world, note this, in a world where countless countries are being torn apart over race, religion, and roots. That's the reality of today's world. And to think that we're immune from it is to be ridiculously naive. We're living in a world where countless countries are being ripped apart over the very divisions we now see in the United States. That's the truth. I mean, that's the stark reality of our so-called global community. What an oxymoron that is. What a community we live in. So much division, so much strife, hatred, violence. I saw images come across the Twitter feed today from Libya. Planes landing at the airport in Tripoli and fire raging in the background as these militia groups are trying to grab hold of the Tripoli airport. That's Libya. A few years ago, pretty stable. But now look at it today. Look at what happened to the United States ambassador just a couple of years ago. This world is changing, and it's not getting better. It's not becoming more tranquil and peaceful. It's getting worse. And as I say, you look inward, you look at the domestic front, and it's the same story. 40% of all the births in America are illegitimate, broken families before they even get started. That's 40% across the board. Among the black community, the Hispanic community, it's much higher. It's not any better over in Britain. Twice as many children in Britain have televisions as have fathers. So what kind of family is that? We're seeing a total breakdown of the family, the family institution, here in the United States, over in Britain. The two greatest powers this world has ever seen, and we see the foundational bulwark of our society just crumbling before our eyes. As we welcome in immigrants by the tens of thousands, and here our own house is hardly in order. Back to this column, Mr. Buchanan says, we no longer speak the same language, worship the same God, honor the same heroes, or share the same holidays. Our politics have become poisonous. Our political parties are at each other's throats. Christianity is in decline. Traditional churches are sundering over moral issues like abortion and same-sex marriage. It says Islam is surging. Our society seems to be disintegrating. It's disintegrating, our society. The truth of it is, America is already breaking up. It really is. And if you know anything about Bible prophecy, Ezekiel 5 and other passages, you know that this breakup's only going to get much worse. I just want to read to you a few verses. Daniel 12 and verse 1 to begin with, to just show you what God says about our society, to show you what God says would be the prevalent condition in our domestic community and in the global community. This is Daniel chapter 12 here, and verse 1. It says, and at that time shall Michael stand up, the great prince, which stands for the children of your people, and there shall be a time of trouble such as never was since there was a nation, even to that same time, a time so troublesome, a time such as never was since there was a nation. Now that's a reality check. That's the world we live in today. That's what God actually prophesied would happen to the global community right before the return of Jesus Christ to this earth. A couple of other verses I'll just show you on the screen. It says, Mark 13:19, it's both in the Old Testament and the New. For in those days, the end days, in other words, the end times, shall be affliction, such as was not from the beginning of creation, which God created unto this time, neither shall be. What does that say about the latter days? That things would get better progressively? That things would become more tranquil, more peaceful, more calm? Not at all. Jeremiah 30, verse 7, back to the Old Testament. Alas, for that day is great, so that none is like it. It's even the time of Jacob's trouble. Jacob's trouble. That's the way the Bible describes the latter days. Affliction, tribulation, trouble. That's how God describes this present evil world, as Paul called it in Galatians 1 and verse 4. That's the reality check that we need when viewing this world as it is. Now, that doesn't mean there's no hope for this world or that there isn't coming a period of tranquility and peace. That is coming. And we talk about that at length in this wonderful little booklet, The Wonderful World Tomorrow, what it will be like. You know what it will be like? It's going to be a tranquil community because God's government, because God's family will rule the earth, because Jesus Christ will administer God's government and enforce God's law of love. What a different world it'll be. You can call the number on your screen and one of our operators will send you out a free copy today, a hard copy, free of charge, no cost, no obligation to you. If you'd like to begin your study right now, just click on the link within this video or go to thetrumpet.com and download The Wonderful World Tomorrow, What It Will Be Like. All right, and looking ahead, if you've been anxious to resume your study in the Revelation series, hopefully we'll be starting that again either tomorrow or on Friday. So until next time, we'll see you on the Trumpet Daily. Thank you for joining us.